Hey, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. So, this is part 2 of our mini-series on Friedrich Nietzsche. In the first video, we covered his major works and some of his key concepts like the will to power, eternal recurrence, and so on. In the second and final video, I want to look at one of Nietzsche's most famous and also controversial sayings, "God is dead." This saying has often been misunderstood and misused by people who want to argue that Nietzsche was an atheist or even an immoral nihilist. So today we're going to see what Nietzsche really meant when he said that God is dead. For more videos on philosophy, including more of my Philosophy Basics episodes, check out my channel. And please subscribe. Okay, so before we get into Nietzsche's argument that God is dead, it's worth recalling his view of truth. In our last episode, I mentioned how Nietzsche thought that truth isn't something objective out there in the world waiting to be discovered by us. Rather, for Nietzsche, truth is something that we create through our interpretations of the world. And this is because, again, for Nietzsche, we can only know things based on our perspective or standpoint. And since each person has a different perspective or standpoint, we all come to know things differently. So there is no single true interpretation of the world. All we have are interpretations, which Nietzsche called perspectives. So just to recap, the main point here is that Nietzsche rejected the idea that there are absolute or objective standards of truth. Truth is always relative to our perspective or standpoint. So if we want to understand Nietzsche's argument that God is dead, we have to keep this view of truth in mind. We can't just think that Nietzsche was claiming that God literally died at some point in the past. That would make no sense. Instead, we should interpret Nietzsche's claim about God's death metaphorically. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's begin. So in The Gay Science, Nietzsche says, God is dead, God remains dead. And we have killed him. Now, the first thing I want to point out here is that Nietzsche doesn't mean that individual people killed God. It wasn't like there was a group of people standing around one day who were like, we really don't like this God character, let's kill him. And then God just dropped over dead. No, instead, what Nietzsche means is that the belief in God has died. Again, this is a metaphor. Nietzsche isn't talking about God literally dying. He is using the death of God as a metaphor to describe the decline of religious belief in the modern world. For Nietzsche, the death of God didn't happen at a particular time in the past. It's happening right now. He says that we are still killing God, or as he puts it elsewhere, we are still giving our reasons why God must die. So again, the death of God is not a past event. It is something that is happening right now and continues to happen as long as people reject religious belief. The main reason why Nietzsche thinks God is dying is because of the development of science. As we saw in the last episode, Nietzsche thought that science was a great force for progress. Science allowed humans to better understand nature and control it to their benefit. But one of the unfortunate side effects of science is that it tends to undermine religious belief. As humans learn more about the world through science, it becomes harder and harder to believe in a God who created the world. As Nietzsche says in Twilight of the Idols, it is science that has put the whole of theology up for sale. Only those opinions and beliefs which can be produced as premises to further scientific inquiry have any real value. In other words, if a religious belief doesn't help us to understand the world scientifically, then it's not worth holding on to. Another reason why Nietzsche thought God was dying is because of the decline of traditional values and morality. Nietzsche thought that the old religious morality was no longer suitable for the modern world. He was especially critical of what he called slave morality, which he thought was exemplified by Christianity. In contrast to slave morality, Nietzsche wanted to develop a new morality that was more appropriate for the modern era. A morality that celebrated the will to power and the drive to overcome. So for Nietzsche, the death of God goes hand in hand with the death of traditional values and morality. Finally, another reason why Nietzsche thought God was dying is because of the rise of nihilism. Nietzsche famously described nihilism as the belief that life is meaningless. He thought that many people in the modern world were becoming nihilists because they had lost their religious beliefs. Nietzsche himself was a kind of nihilist, but he wasn't happy about it. He wanted to find a way out of nihilism. And he thought that the first step towards doing that was to recognize that we are in a nihilistic crisis. For Nietzsche, the central problem of nihilism is that it undermines our values and gives rise to despair. Since life is meaningless, nothing matters. And so nothing is good or bad except for what we personally prefer. So we end up in a situation where we can't say that anything is objectively right or wrong. And this leads to despair because we no longer have any motivation to do anything. If nothing matters, then why bother doing anything? And this is the situation that Nietzsche describes when he says that God is dead. Life is meaningless. Nothing matters anymore. And this is a terrible thing. Nietzsche says that the death of God brings about an immense danger. He worries that people will respond to the meaninglessness of life by giving up, by throwing themselves into despair. And this is why, according to Nietzsche, we still need God. Even if God is dead, we still need to pretend that he's alive, because otherwise we'll fall into despair. Nietzsche says, if there is no God, then all is permitted, which sounds like Nietzsche is saying that we can do whatever we want now that we no longer need to worry about divine punishment. But that's not quite what he means. What Nietzsche actually means is that if there is no God, then nothing matters anymore. And this can lead us to despair. For Nietzsche, the fact that God is dead creates a crisis, an immense danger, but it also creates an opportunity. While many people will fall into despair, others will use this crisis as an opportunity to create new values and a new morality. Nietzsche believed that this is what the Bermensch or the overman will do. The overman will take the death of God as an opportunity to create a new set of values and a new morality that will help them to overcome nihilism and live a meaningful life. So Nietzsche's response to the death of God is both positive and negative. On the one hand, he recognizes the immense danger that it brings with it, the danger of despair and nihilism. But on the other hand, he also recognizes the opportunity that it creates, the opportunity to create new values and a new morality. All right, so hopefully that helped to shed some light on Nietzsche's provocative claim that God is dead. So that was a brief introduction to Nietzsche's philosophy. If you want to learn more, I've got a bunch more videos on Nietzsche as well as other philosophers. And if you want to learn more about philosophy in general, I'd recommend picking up a copy of The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant. Durant does a great job of introducing all of the major figures in Western philosophy from the pre-Socratics up until the early 20th century. And if you want to take your study of philosophy to the next level, I highly recommend checking out the online courses at our website. My own philosophy courses are on Plato and Aristotle, but we've got a lot more on offer from great teachers like Tom Morris, Peter Kreeft, Edward Fieser, and more. All right, thanks for watching. Please subscribe,